Elvis Presley stepped into the narrow church hallway just as the ceremony was supposed to begin. The space smelled faintly of old wood and dying flowers, the kind of place meant for quiet vows, not famous faces. Borrowed tuxedos hung a little crooked on nervous shoulders. Dresses had been pressed too many times. Guests whispered behind cupped hands, trying to pretend nothing felt wrong. At first, no one noticed him. Not because he was hiding, but because everyone was focused on holding themselves together. The bride stood near the doorway, hands clenched, breathing shallow and fast. Her smile came and went like it was struggling to survive. The groom sat on a folding chair nearby, staring into a small pile of envelopes, flipping through them slowly, as if checking again might change the truth. There was almost nothing inside. No reception money, no cushion, no backup plan, just enough to pay the church and hope no one asked what came next. Elvis had already been warned. His people told him to keep moving, to stay invisible, to never step into someone else's moment. A wedding was sacred ground. Interfering would turn kindness into spectacle. It would invite attention the couple did not ask for and could not escape. He understood all of that. He had lived his entire life inside rules built to protect other people from the weight of his presence. But something in that hallway cut through him. Not desperation exactly. Dignity. The kind that breaks quietly instead of loudly. These two were trying to go forward without letting anyone see how close they were to falling apart. Elvis watched the groom tuck the envelopes back into his jacket, forcing a calm expression that fooled no one. He saw the bride wipe her eyes quickly, before anyone could notice. He felt the moment tightening, closing in on them. The organist shifted on the bench. A door creaked open. Someone cleared their throat and whispered that it was time. The couple had reached the edge of the day they had dreamed about, and there was nowhere left to step without something shattering. Elvis stood still, aware that whatever he did next could not be undone. If he stayed silent, the wedding would go on, but the weight would follow them forever. If he stepped in, it would be public, irreversible, and impossible to explain away. He took one step forward, and as his shoe touched the floor, the organ music abruptly stopped. To understand why that single step mattered, you have to understand Elvis Presley at this moment in his life. He was not just famous. He was surrounded. Every move he made was watched, measured, and filtered through people whose job was to keep situations exactly like this from happening. His schedule was planned down to the minute. His appearances were controlled environments. Surprise was treated like a threat. Kindness was acceptable only when it stayed invisible. By now, Elvis had learned the rules the hard way. Never insert yourself into ordinary lives. Never turn private moments into public memories. Never do anything that creates expectations you cannot manage later. Weddings were especially dangerous. They belonged to the people getting married, not to anyone passing through. One wrong move could turn a simple act into a story that followed someone forever. Elvis knew that better than most because his own life had stopped being private years ago. And yet, standing in that hallway, he could feel something pressing against those rules. He noticed the way people avoided eye contact, how smiles felt rehearsed. He caught fragments of hushed conversations that stopped when he drew closer. This was not celebration. It was survival. These were people trying to hold on to dignity while the day slipped through their fingers. Elvis did not ask questions at first. He listened. He watched. He waited, the way he always did when something felt off. His team hovered nearby, tense and alert. They could sense trouble even if they did not know its shape yet. They whispered reminders about boundaries and consequences, about headlines and misunderstandings, about how easily good intentions could turn into regret. Elvis nodded, absorbing it all, because none of it was wrong. But then he learned just enough. Not everything. Just enough to understand that this wedding was hanging by a thread. That what these two people needed was not sympathy and not attention, but something far more fragile. Relief. The kind that comes without explanation. Elvis felt the familiar pull between who he was supposed to be and who he still believed he was underneath it all. Walking away would be easy. Staying silent would be safe. And for the first time that day, he wondered which choice he would regret more. The story reached Elvis in pieces, never all at once. A few words here, a half sentence there, offered quietly and followed by an apology that no one had asked for. They had wanted something small, nothing fancy, just a ceremony, a meal afterward, maybe a photograph to remember it by. They had saved carefully, spending what little they had on rings and the paperwork that made it official. That part mattered. Then everything else went wrong at the same time. Hours at work were cut without warning. A car repair could not wait. A medical bill arrived early and higher than expected. The money disappeared faster than either of them could admit. By the time the wedding day arrived, there was nothing left for a reception hall, nothing for a band, nothing for pictures. They considered canceling, even standing there dressed and ready, but people had already traveled. Family had taken time off. So they went forward, hoping no one would notice how thin the plan had become. Guests filled the pews anyway. Laughter sounded forced. Compliments landed awkwardly. The room felt heavy with the kind of shame that does not ask for help because it does not believe help is coming. Elvis listened, leaning against the wall, saying nothing at first. He had learned that rushing into moments like this only made people close off. So he waited. He let the silence do the work. When he finally spoke, it was gentle. A small joke about nerves. A comment about how good they looked together. Just enough to make the bride exhale and the groom smile for real, if only for a second. The relief flickered, then faded, because nothing had actually changed. The truth was still sitting in the room, untouched. Someone asked where everyone should go afterward. No one answered. The bride looked down. The groom cleared his throat and said they would figure it out. Elvis felt the pressure tightening, not loud or dramatic, but steady and relentless. He could sense the moment slipping past the point where kindness alone could hold it together. Then the pastor stepped forward, hands folded, voice calm and professional, and asked if they were ready to begin. Elvis looked from the couple to the doorway, realizing the window to do anything at all was about to close. It does not stay quiet for long. Someone near the back leans to a friend and whispers his name. A head turns, then another. Recognition spreads the way it always does, soft at first, then impossible to stop. The energy in the room shifts. What had been private desperation becomes something fragile, exposed to interpretation. Elvis feels it immediately. His presence alone has changed the temperature of the day. He knows what happens next if he walks away. The couple will remember this forever, not as kindness, but as the moment hope brushed past them and disappeared. A story that will grow heavier with time. He also knows what happens if he stays. Expectations will inflate instantly. People will assume things. Help will turn into spectacle. A quiet wedding will become something it was never meant to be. There will be no way to control the narrative once it starts. His team closes in, voices low but urgent. This is exactly what they warned him about. Someone offers to guide him out a side door before things spiral further. No one is accusing him of anything yet, but they can all see it coming. Once the ceremony starts, there will be no clean exit. Elvis nods, hearing every word, but his attention keeps drifting back to the front of the room. The bride's mother is standing off to the side now, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief she has folded and unfolded too many times. The groom notices Elvis watching and instinctively looks away, embarrassed, like he has already asked for too much by simply existing in the same space. He does not say a word. He does not ask for help. He does not even look hopeful. That somehow makes it worse. Elvis understands then that any choice he makes will define this day, not just for the couple, but for everyone watching. Silence will be interpreted as indifference. Action will be interpreted as something else entirely. There is no neutral ground left to stand on. The room feels tight, like it is holding its breath, waiting for him to decide who he is going to be. The pastor clears his throat again, preparing to begin. Elvis straightens his jacket, feels every eye settle on him, and turns toward the altar. And the entire room freezes. Elvis does not raise his voice. He does not announce anything. He does not turn toward the room or wait for permission. He moves with the same calm certainty he brings to a stage. But this time, there is no spotlight, no introduction. He steps closer to the pastor and speaks quietly, too low for the room to hear. Then he turns and speaks to someone else near the side. A few short sentences, nothing dramatic. The tension does not break yet. It tightens. People watch him move, unsure what they are witnessing. No grand gesture. No explanation. Just action. Within minutes, arrangements begin to shift. A reception space that was never supposed to exist suddenly does. Music that was never scheduled is somehow ready. Food appears where there was going to be none. The details come together so smoothly that most people never realize how close the day came to falling apart. Elvis insists on one thing and makes it clear without saying much at all. This is their wedding, not his moment. No announcements. No attention drawn his way. The celebration continues exactly as it should have, as if it was always meant to unfold like this. When the ceremony begins again, the organ sounds steadier. The bride's hand stops shaking. The groom finally breathes. Laughter returns slowly, then all at once. Relief spreads through the room, quiet but undeniable. Guests smile without forcing it now. The fear drains away, replaced by something lighter, something almost unreal. Elvis stays in the background, watching, making sure nothing tips back into chaos. He never takes credit. He never asks for thanks. After the vows are spoken and the room empties, he pulls the couple aside. Just a few words. He tells them this was not charity. It was respect. He reminds them that they did nothing wrong by needing help and nothing special to deserve it beyond showing up for each other. Then he shakes their hands, hugs the bride, and leaves before anyone can stop him. By the time his car pulls away, the story has already started moving faster than he ever could. What happens spreads from guest to guest, growing softer and brighter with every retelling. It becomes legend not because of money, but because of timing, and because one man knew exactly when to step in and exactly when to disappear. By the next morning, the wedding had already slipped into something else. It traveled quietly at first, passed between friends over coffee, between relatives on phone calls that lasted longer than planned. A miracle, someone said, half joking, half serious. The details shifted immediately. Some insisted Elvis had sung a song during the reception. Others claimed he stayed for hours, laughing and dancing like an old friend. A few swore he paid for everything personally, down to the smallest detail. None of those versions were quite right. What stayed consistent was the feeling. The way he had treated two ordinary people as if their moment mattered more than his image. That part did not change no matter who told the story. It was not about money. It was about timing. About knowing when to act and when to disappear. By midday, reporters were calling churches and relatives, chasing fragments of a story that refused to sit still. Cameras showed up too late. The moment they wanted had already passed. Elvis did not help them. When asked, he waved it off with a shrug and a soft laugh, uncomfortable with the attention. He said it was nothing. Said people made too much out of things. Said he just happened to be there. Anyone who knew him understood that was how he always handled praise. He never liked the spotlight when it followed him into places it did not belong. But the people who were in that room knew better. They remembered the tension before he moved. They remembered how close the day came to breaking. They saw restraint where spectacle would have been easier. They saw kindness delivered without announcement, without strings, without expectation of return. That was what made it stick. The couple went back to their lives quickly. Jobs, bills, routines. Nothing magically changed about their circumstances, but they carried something with them that did not fade. A memory that felt slightly unreal, like something borrowed from a dream and tucked away carefully so it would not be damaged by explanation. Years later, they would still look at each other and smile at the same time, remembering how it felt when everything almost collapsed, and how, for a brief moment, it did not. Years later, the story still circulates because it reveals something about Elvis that fame usually buried. Not the performer, not the icon, but the man underneath the machinery built around him. By then, his image had been frozen into something larger than human, all jumpsuits and stages and screaming crowds. Yet this moment endured because it ran in the opposite direction. There was no audience to impress, no record to sell, no applause waiting on the other side of the gesture. Elvis did not need permission to care, and that mattered more than anything he did that day. He lived in a world where no was the default answer, where handlers existed to prevent risk, and where sincerity was treated like a liability. Saying yes was dangerous. Saying yes without explaining yourself was even worse. But he understood something that fame often erases. That timing can matter more than scale. That presence can outweigh performance. The wedding did not make him a legend. His music had already done that. His voice, his rhythm, his ability to command a room had secured his place long before he stepped into that church hallway. What this moment did was quieter and somehow deeper. It reminded people why legends last when the noise fades. Not because they dominate every space they enter, but because they know when not to. People who heard the story years later often focused on the wrong parts. The money, the logistics, the idea of rescue. But those who really understood it talked about restraint, about how he never centered himself, about how he left before gratitude could turn into obligation, about how he protected the couple's dignity as fiercely as he protected his own. That was the real lesson hidden inside the story. That power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it moves quietly, fixes what is broken, and disappears before anyone can clap. Elvis stepped into someone else's life at the exact moment it was about to crack, not to change it forever, but to steady it long enough for them to keep going on their own. That is why the story survives. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. A reminder that even the most famous man in the room can choose humility. And that sometimes, the most meaningful thing a legend can do is refuse to act like one.